All right, and you're back with more NBA coverage. And in this one, I will cover all the basketball games from last Wednesday, starting out with the Timberwolves versus Mavericks matchup. And this one, what you really have to take away from this one is that it was a nail biter through and through. From the very first quarter, really, everybody on both sides of the match were just trading bucket after bucket. The Timberwolves were able to belt out to a little bit of a lead, but even when you initially thought that they were out of a game, in come the Mavericks with the likes of Kyrie Irving and even PJ Washington Jr. to an extent, stepping it up and making this game way closer than anyone would have thought it would have been without the likes of Luka Doncic in this one. You expected that kind of intensity. I mean, the Timberwolves literally got gentlemen swept by this very team in last postseason. They're going to want to play out there with some fire of some kind because they know that ultimately it may take them having to face off in the playoffs again to knock them off when it matters the most. But they want to start that in the regular season. All in all, the Timberwolves would end the match with a final score of 115 to 114, taking it by a single point, and a good amount of players contributed. I mean, you had Jaden McDaniels go off for 27 points on a night where Anthony Edwards did heat up a little later on, but with 6 of 19 shooting, it took him a while to really get going. They had Michael Conley Jr. starting, and he contributed 18 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds on 6 of 9 shooting. It also helped that they did continue to get quality minutes off the bench from a player like Naz Reid. As for the Mavericks, Kyrie Irving had 36 points, 9 assists, and 4 rebounds on 12 of 21 shooting. And PJ Washington Jr., despite not being the greatest three-point shooter, did post move and get to the foul line in order to end up with 30 points and 7 rebounds on the night on 12 of 22 shooting overall. On to the next game from that Wednesday night that was nationally televised. We have the Warriors and the Kings. And this one it was just disappointing. I mean, you figured it was going to be a contested matchup. And honestly, pretty much every single Warriors and Kings game over the past couple of years or so has been, when you really think about it. But even then, for Golden State to get out to the lead that they did after a slower first quarter, they ended up putting up 41 points in the second quarter and had a 16-point lead in halftime. You would think that they would be able to close out a game with being spotted that much distance, and they just don't, because they fall to the same issues every time, leading to their eventual demise over the course of a ball game. I mean, quite literally, over this entire stretch of just losing game after game. They can't find any other players outside of Stephen Curry to generate offense across entire blocks of time in a given quarter. And in this case, it looked to be like that for most of the second half. Sloppy transition defense and sloppy defense in general, in terms of late rotations to shooters, and just poor play inside, allowing guys like Domantas Sabonis to get going. DeMar DeRozan scorched them by himself in the third quarter and single-handedly brought him back as far as this game goes. And by the end of the quarter, they actually ended up taking a small lead, or at least making things even. Just like that. The big takeaway was the fact that they were able to get Keon Ellis and other guys to commit to playing just lockdown defense on Stephen Curry, because, Doug Christie and the team figured that the best way to try and knock them off was to force other players outside of Stephen Curry to beat them. And honestly, with how things panned out, they were right about it. I mean, literally, along with DeMar DeRozan scorching them by himself, you had De'Aaron Fox get involved for a little bit, and you had Malik Monk continuing to make plays at the right time for his team and also defer when needed, along with Keon Ellis playing that lockdown defense. So that resulted in a half for Stephen Curry where he did not put up a single point and where he had one of the worst shooting stretches of the entire season. He also, again, couldn't really rely on anybody else at the right times. I don't really care about what the box score says. Even though they lost by 6 points, the final score of 123 to 117 with the Kings taking it. Literally, for maintaining a lead, it just crumbled at the wrong time. Like, even with 6 players finishing in double-digit scoring, it didn't really seem to come through when they needed to maintain the lead. Like, most of that was them just trying to make the score look better from an optical lens. There was no real competition there once that went into full force. As for the Kings, I mean, you had DeRozan by himself putting up 32 points and single-handedly bringing them back into this one. But Domantas Sabonis had a great game as well, contributing 26 points and 18 rebounds on the night. Which again, just continues to bring home the point that they desperately need some element of a big man. Like, even when you get Draymond Green back, like, there's just no way. I mean, he by himself had nearly as many total rebounds as the entire starting five. What is that? Like, that's just alarming. Malik Monk also had 20 points and 9 assists on a 7 of 15 shooting from the field. Moving on to Thursday's action with a bit of an unconventional game between the Bucks and the Heat. You see, the Bucks managed to reach this point with an unorthodox week to begin their stretch. You had them miss 3 consecutive days of practice because they couldn't necessarily get to any major facility in New Orleans at the time because they were dealing with snow and inclement weather. They were forced to stay inside. They couldn't do much of anything. And they were also not able to board their flight in time to end up getting to where they needed to be. So, as a result, they had to delay the game for a little bit. That Bucks Pelicans game was actually postponed. But they would be able to get in for this Thursday matchup between the Heat. It had a delay because they wanted to get in their time for practice. Now, I was thinking, like, there's no way that just a few hours of practice are going to make up for multiple missed days of practice. And so I naturally thought they were going to start out a little sluggish, which is exactly what happened. I mean, they went the first 2+ minutes of the ball game without a single point before Brook Lopez got one to go. And even then, the Heat, at around the 5-minute and 47 mark with a Bam Adebayo floater, they went up 20-5 in the first quarter alone. I wasn't going to penalize Milwaukee too much about it. Like, that's a hard situation to deal with, and naturally you're going to be out of rhythm. But if they did want to win this game, they were going to turn back. They were going to have to turn it around quickly. Surely enough, they did. Now, the Heat weren't without blame in this. They had some stupid turnovers at stupid moment. Just stupid turnover after stupid turnover from pretty much everybody. Terry Rozier III was an offender. You had Tyler Hero taking some really bad shots at times and making some horrible decisions. And all of a sudden, the Bucks were given a lead of 51-56 after a little while. They would then build upon it in a relatively short amount of time. Now, think about this. You are now down 65-55, and you once more have Tyler Hero taking a bad shot. So it leads to yet another Bucks possession. Now, if it can't get any worse than that, well, you'll be disappointed to hear that Duncan Robinson would actually foul Damian Lillard on a three-point attempt with just a second or so left in the first half. So naturally, they're going to give him the free throws at that point. They're in the bonus. Damian Lillard makes all three. Then Kel'el Ware decides to get in on the action and turn the ball over himself. As the Bucks are granted yet another possession, they need a quick shot to try to convert. And surely enough, Damian Lillard, fading away in the left corner, like he's Stephen Curry, turns around and greens the shot, giving the Bucks a 6-point flurry in just a single second, with Damian Lillard contributing to all of it. They go up 71-65, well, 55 at that point. The third quarter relatively saw the Bucks just keep it going. And it got so bad that in the fourth quarter, they would eventually change the broadcast. That's how bad it was. Because there was, the next game that I'll be talking about, that was going on and starting at 10 o'clock. And this game was still going on. They figured that they needed to just focus the attention on that game. And they also just could not, for an hour or so, leave LeBron James alone. They desperately need the ratings. That's how bad it is. But I do get their decision to cut it off. It's not a compelling game anymore. The Bucks, surprisingly, managed to overcome all of that and win by 29. And with their 16-point lead at halftime, they were also the team with the largest halftime lead this season after trailing by 15 or more points in a game. And the turnaround was just elite. I mean, you had Damian Lillard eventually end up with a triple-double of his own, 29 points, 11 assists, and 10 rebounds on 9 of 21 shooting. You had Giannis put up 25 and 12 himself. And you also had Gary Trent Jr., which is, very important to this as well, because some of his threes quite literally turned the game around and flipped the script completely, with him getting 21 points on 7 of 10 shooting from beyond the arc. As for the Heat, I'll definitely get into their entire week, but they are also dealing with a lot. They're dealing with a whole lot. Nonetheless, Kel'el Ware has emerged as a threat for them in this one. Though he played in a little bit of garbage time, he had 22 points on 9 of 15 shooting, along with 10 rebounds to lead the squad. Tyler Hero had a very rough shooting night, like I said. 6 of 19 shooting and 21 points. It also didn't help that Duncan Robinson couldn't really hit his three-point shots either, shooting just 25% from that range. Team as a whole shot 23.5%. That will never win you a basketball game, literally. And the Bucks were able to outpace them in most areas, while keeping turnovers after a little while to a minimum. They also gave themselves more opportunities, just generally speaking, from the field. And naturally, if you're going to get more, you're going to be able to convert on a good amount of those second chance opportunities. Moving on to the matchup that I mentioned, the Celtics and Lakers on this particular Thursday night. The Celtics would happen to start out the game fine, but things would get out of hand for them after a 17-5 Lakers run. And after that, they just took complete and total control of the ball game. Despite Boston's best efforts to make this into something tight, contested, they couldn't do it. Before you knew it, at halftime, they were down by 19 points. Now, they would start out the third quarter getting into some of their usual bullshit with the open threes and the rhythm shots, but they still had no response for the Lakers' offense at that point. They were still allowing them to get buckets and respond. They only minimized the damage a little bit, and the Lakers were honestly able to keep the same pace throughout the fourth quarter, ending this one with a final score of 117-96, a crucial win for them with their best first half of three-point shooting mixed in there, 11 of 20 shooting. They, as a team, they would shoot 42.9% from that range, and they would also be more efficient from the field, simply put. Seemed like the Celtics, all their players, especially over that early stretch, shots just weren't falling, and they were also, when the shots weren't falling, you're naturally thinking that one can turn it around, but they're not even sticking to their, brand of basketball. They're just forcing up shit here and there, and that really hurt them in this one. Now, Austin Reeves had 23 points and 6 assists on 7 of 13 shooting, while Anthony Davis contributed 24 points on 9 of 18 shooting. As for LeBron, he had 20 points on 9 of 20 shooting, but he also had 14 rebounds and 6 assists, so that certainly went a long way in this one. Dalton Knecht off the bench also contributed 13 points and 3 threes in 14 minutes of play. As for the Celtics, Jaylen Brown had 17 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists on 7 of 19 shooting, with Jason Tatum adding 16 points on 5 of 12 shooting, along with 5 assists and 6 rebounds. Stinky stuff. Kristaps Porzingis was far and away their best player, but naturally, as he slowed down a little bit, you would like your two core players to have done way more here. Like, Kristaps Porzingis is capable of that, but 22 points on his end should not lead the team. And Peyton Pritchard definitely underwhelmed on this match here. For him to just have 7 points on 2 of 12 shooting as their resident 6-man and as their resident, honestly, it's an optimal player for them to have coming off the bench, and you perform like that, that says a lot. That really does. Now, moving on to Saturday action, because there was no nationally televised basketball on Friday. I also plan to handle this particular thing just a little differently. But I'll get into the brunt of that later on. We start out with the second of the 2-game series in Paris between the Spurs and the Pacers here. Now, again, the first one did take place on Thursday, but for whatever reason, they decided to have it on NBA TV instead of nationally broadcasting it, which was stupid, in my opinion. Nonetheless, the Spurs were able to handle business in that one and win it 140-110. This one was going to be interesting always. Of course, Wembanyama would start off pretty well, getting some good plays going, and even just completely owning Aaron Nesmith on multiple occasions. Though I don't necessarily understand why they thought it a good idea to place Nesmith on a player like Wembanyama. With that being said, they overcame a slower start as a team before bringing things a little closer over time, and then the Pacers were just able to completely take over, where ultimately, with their defensive effort and elite shot making from pretty much every level, you had TJ McConnell getting shots to go, You had Miles Turner getting buckets at the right time, though his game wasn't necessarily the best. And Tyrese Halliburton would also end off the second half with a buzzer-beating layup. They would ride that into the third quarter, especially with Tyrese Halliburton in just the last few minutes of it. I mean, you had guys like Stephon Castle and Devin Vassell step up for the Spurs, and even Harrison Barnes got a few shots to go before you would have the likes of Victor Wembanyama and Chris Paul taking the lead at multiple points. However, something, and I mean something, sparked the fire in Tyrese Halliburton. We always mention that he can at times be an aggressively passive player on the court. Well, that dynamic changed, especially in this third quarter. With 3 minutes and 25 seconds left, he gets a two-pointer to go. And then across the next few minutes, he just gets 3 after 3 after 3 after 3, demoralizing the defense. Now, Pascal Siakam would join in on the party, but by that point, you could tell that the Pacers had full control of this ball game. And in every single one of the Spurs' last few losses, this is exactly how it goes. Not necessarily the fact of Tyrese Halliburton in this particular one putting up 16 straight points by himself in the third quarter, but the fact that they will have it. They had the lead. They had the lead in this third quarter, and they had it within one. So you mean to tell me that by the end of this point, after being up just 80-79, you allow them by the end of it to go on a 19-6 run? That's what you're telling me? Like 19-6 run? Dude, come on, man. That's absurd. So naturally, even with Stephon Castle having a 10-point quarter himself, it was just too much to overcome. Their entire offense was in a rhythm completely. And the Spurs offense, in some cases, they were clamped up by a Pacers defense that has improved over the past few weeks. But they also were not getting shots to fall, and they eventually decided to just put in the bench unit. The Pacers would win this one with a score of 136-98, making this pair of teams the first, making the Pacers the first team, I guess, to win by at least 35 or more the very game after losing by 30 plus. The teams are also the first pair to allow 135 points in back-to-back ball games, while also going at least one with scoring less than 105, I believe. Just a wild stat line in every context. Tyrese Halliburton had 28 points along with that quarter on 11 of 17 shooting. Pascal Siakam had 23 points and 11 boards on the night. Andrew Nembhard also contributed 15 points, 8 rebounds, 9 assists, and 3 steals on 6 of 9 shooting. As for the Spurs, Victor Wembanyama had 12 rebounds and 20 points on the night. On 7 of 16 shooting, it was not enough. Stephon Castle had the 17 points, but on 7 of 20 shooting, Harrison Barnes, if he's leading you in scoring at this point, you do have problems. But at least he did show up. 25 points, 7 rebounds for him on out of 14 shooting. Now, as for the other action, since most of the attention would be on basketball at this particular point, they started off the showcase games on ABC as they would usually do around this time. They went into the first one between the Nuggets and Timberwolves. Yet another matchup of potential revenge, and honestly, I thought the Nuggets were going to get this one. I thought that they were going to show some intensity here. But in reality, I mean, like, what in the world even happened to them, honestly? They were just playing uncharacteristically against them. Like, it was, don't get me wrong, they started out fine, but they could not really control the paint like they would have liked. They also got themselves into sloppy turnover after sloppy turnover that made this game much harder for them to win. And it just continued for the rest of the game. Then, Anthony Edwards decided to wake up after being a little lackluster to start out this ball game. And by that point, with everybody else on the Timberwolves doing good damage, I mean, the game was theirs. The game was theirs. Simply put, the Nuggets would eventually have to put in the bench unit as the Timberwolves would take this one with a final score of 133-104, with Anthony Edwards going off for 34 points on 14 of 23 shooting and 3 of 8 from the three-point line. I also believe that this was the very game that Anthony Edwards passed up Karl Anthony Towns' record of three-pointers for the Timberwolves franchise. Now, it took him a while, but at the very least, he did manage to get the job done. As of the recording of this video, I don't believe that he is even at 1,000 yet. The Timberwolves are a relatively new franchise, so that's understood. But man, that's gotta be rough. As for the Nuggets, Jokic would have 20 points and 11 assists, but did have 7 turnovers on his end. He shot 9 of 13 from the field. At the very least, he still has not had a game since November 3rd of 2022 with 10 or more turnovers. Though that's dangerously close when you really think about it. Jamal Murray had 25 points and 5 boards on 10 of 16 shooting. Moving on to the Celtics and Mavericks match, similar thing. Another sort of rivalry fitting in with the Rivals Week theme. You would think that the Mavericks would show more intensity. You would think that they would. After the way they went out on the biggest stage last year. There was a balance here. I mean, they started out on fire. And then over the course of the first quarter, their defense just weakened because they gave the Celtics the shots that they were absolutely looking for. And not even from all the places you would expect. I mean, even had Luke Cornett getting some damage done on the offensive end of the basketball, which you never really expect. But like I continue to say time and again, you let them get into any sort of rhythm and you fail to contest, you're going to lose every single time. And naturally, the Celtics were able to win this quarter by 14, going into the half with a lead of 10. Now, things would stay relatively competitive to open up the second half, but once more, the Mavericks went through a cold spell to trump them all. Though, Quentin Grimes, man, I don't know. Like, he literally would try his best to give them some energy. It wasn't necessarily enough, and the Celtics would still belt out to a large lead, but you would have Quentin Grimes get a crazy fucking dunk to go on none other than Luke Cornett, which he absolutely Like when you go and watch the play, he absolutely posterized them. I mean, that's a message sent. But clearly, nobody else was peeping it, so the Mavericks would still be defeated at the hands of the Celtics by a final score of 122 to 107. Derek White had 23 points, with Jason Tatum also contributing 24, and Jaylen Brown contributing 22 points. As for the Mavericks, Kyrie Irving had 22 points, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds on 11 of 23 shooting. Quentin Grimes had 20 points off the bench on 7 of 12 shooting, despite not having any in the first half. Daniel Gafford had 19 points on 6 of 12 shooting, and PJ Washington Jr. had 17 points and 4 of 13 shooting. On to the nightcap. You have your traditional matchup between the LeBron James-led Lakers and the Steph Curry-led Warriors. Yet another match that the Warriors kept close in the first half. I mean, quite literally, they were down by just a single point to cap off the second quarter with a Moses Moody jumper. But I kid you not, literally, they get into the third quarter and they just completely lose control of what they're doing. As the Lakers, with some reinforcements now in Jared Vanderbilt, again, they would do their best to make anyone else outside of Stephen Curry step up for them and do the dirty work. That resulted in them getting down by at least 13 points in this ballgame. And eventually, though they tried to fight back a little bit, it was just too late. There's nothing they could do about it at that particular point. Now, if you thought that I had stated that Stephen Curry's second half against the Kings last Wednesday was bad, well, this one was worse. He literally didn't make a single shot from the field while taking, I believe, somewhere around 10. Didn't make anything. And we finished the game with 13 points and 9 assists. Once more, similar case where even though you see players like Podziemski with 17 and Wiggins with 20, it seemed like it just wasn't enough. Granted, you can have Curry in those spots because, again, when it counted, he felt as though he was the only one capable of really getting shots to go. So naturally, he decided to take a few errant shots here and there. The Warriors' demise is, once again, their inability to really stop a dominant big man. I mean, Sabonis is great, don't get me wrong. AD is a different beast, and he would feast on whatever we call our front court. I mean, he had 36 points and 13 rebounds in this ballgame. Now, LeBron also contributed 25 points, 12 assists, and 5 rebounds on 12 of 25 shooting. And Austin Reeves also had 16 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds in this one on 6 of 10 shooting. Dalton Knecht and Max Christie had 13 and 11 points off the bench, respectively. Dorian Finney-Smith had 8 points off the bench. Not even off the bench. But you would also have Gabe Vincent and Jared Vanderbilt put points on the board. So everybody ate, to some extent. There was no nationally televised Sunday action, but when it comes to the action on Monday, you would start it out with action between... I stand corrected, there was no Monday night action that was televised, But there was basketball yesterday, and we get into it with the Lakers versus 76ers matchup to start out. And in this one, the 76ers did manage to make this a fight early on. It did help, however, that a little bit after a Gaston Yabusele dunk, they would have Anthony Davis come back to the locker room and get checked. All the while, you would have Eric Gordon extending this lead eventually. And Tyrese Maxey was just a killer all night long. In any sense of the word, he was just getting straight to the rack with blistering speed. That's the specialty of his. But it seemed like the Lakers weren't even really ready for it in any context. He just got to a spot and cooked up. Now, you would have different players for the Lakers, like a Dalton Connect, trying to keep them in this one. But ultimately, with a lack of true defensive fortitude, other players for the 76ers were starting to make shit happen. Ricky Council, the fourth out here, making multiple corner threes and shit at multiple points of time, including one to end off the first half, ironically enough. It would not be a fun time for the Lakers at all. Let's just put it like that. They were down 73-57 at the end of the first half, and TNT sideline reporter Jared Greenberg would also report just a little bit before the third quarter started that Anthony Davis is going to be out with an abdominal strain. Now, at that point, you felt that there was not really a chance for the Lakers to come back in this one. They did try. They tried, but to no real avail. Things really came to a head, though, when I saw Eric Gordon, of all fucking people, hit a damn logo 3. At that point, it was effectively done. And the 76ers would keep control, all while impressing the likes of the Philadelphia Eagles squad. Yeah, there were some players from the Super Bowl bound team at the game. A.J. Brown, Isaiah Rodgers Sr., Devontae Smith, Darius Slay, and Adam. All the same. They were certainly impressed with what they saw. A 14-point win by the 76ers. The score of 118-104, with Tyrese Maxey contributing 43 points on 15 of 26 shooting on the night. Kelly Oubre Jr. also had 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists on 8 of 18 shooting. Ricky Council IV had 16 points. Eric Gordon and Gaston Yabusele had 14 points. As for the Lakers, they did actually do something that caught people's eye, because of course it would. They elected to put in Bronny James in the first quarter. They called him back up from the G League after a 31-point performance, and they decided to give him some early burn. Now, it didn't pan out. He did not score anything. But I guess it could continue to happen in the future, especially if you're not necessarily having the personnel you would like out there. LeBron himself, the senior, would have 31 points, 8 rebounds, and 9 assists, which, when you look at it, is fine on paper. 10 of 16 shooting and 10 free throws, but he also contributed 8 turnovers, and that really made up the difference in this ball game. Even with players like Dalton Connect getting 24 points off the bench and trying to light a spark in this team, when you turn the ball over 22 times and also give up 27 points off turnovers, losing by 14, you can see exactly where the problem lies. Like, they didn't necessarily shoot the best from 3 either. Both of them were relatively similar in that regard. But they were able to protect the damn basketball. They were able to extend possessions. Like, they had 91 attempts to the Lakers' 72. even though the Lakers were more effective. Like, obviously, like I said, the more opportunities you get, you're bound to convert on a good amount of them. And that stood very true. Moving on to the Bucks versus Trailblazers matchup, and a lot was on the line. You had Damian Lillard obviously seeking out revenge. You had Gary Trent Jr. seeking out revenge. And you had Pat Connaughton, who started out as a Trailblazer, also looking for revenge. They would start out with a pretty solid lead, but the signs were there that this was going to get out of hand early on. I mean, you had Scoot Henderson hitting jumpers. You had Shaedon Sharpe being a great option at 6-man, getting different shots to go off the dribble, hitting everything in the mid-range. Everything seemed to be flowing right for Portland, and then they just turned it up a notch. I mean, literally. They themselves went on a run to give themselves a lead of 3 at the end of the first half. And despite the Bucks' best efforts, they kept it going, aided by the likes of Deni Avdija. Now, I have not watched a lot of Blazers basketball for good reasons, but the way he was playing in the third quarter, and even the broadcast team noted it, he kind of vaulted them to a victory with his performance in that third quarter, and he kept it going in the fourth. You brought over Deni Avdija from the Wizards for his two-way potential, and you knew that physically on defense he was going to be a monster, but you didn't really get to see it all that much on the offensive side of the basketball because, of course, the Wizards are just poor, right? But if he could do that consistently, you've got yourself quite the player there. It also helped that DeAndre Ayton, aside from a few gaffes, actually decided to show up and play basketball. And, he would contribute nicely. I guess I can no longer ask the question of who exactly is Toumani Camara, because the man would quite literally, though there weren't really any stakes on the line, he managed to get a poster on Giannis at the tail end of the ball game. So, yeah, I guess everyone's going to really be asking that question now. The Trailblazers would shockingly win this one with a score of 125-112, with Deni Avdija putting up a season-high 30 points on 10 of 18 shooting. DeAndre Ayton had 21 points and 14 boards on 9 of 19 shooting. And from Nate Simons had 25 points on 9 of 17 shooting, while also adding 7 assists. And Shaedon Sharpe, off the bench, had 17 points and 5 boards on 6 of 14 shooting. Optimal candidate for a 6-man. Like I said, that is how his style of play seems to be at this point. Damian Lillard would have 20 points and 6 assists. Giannis Antetokounmpo would have 39 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists on 17 of 24 shooting. And really, though they managed to shoot 50.6% from the field, it seems like most of the core players here did struggle. They also could not space the floor. And granted, the Blazers made just one more three-point field goal, but they were getting good looks or baiting the Bucks into making stupid decisions. I mean, they drew 10 more free throw attempts and made all of those extra ones to get to 23. They had 52 rebounds compared to the Bucks' 36. So the extension of different possessions certainly paid dividends for them as well. And that's where they truly won the game yesterday. Now, to get off of that track and try to cover the sequencing of all 30 NBA teams' last week or so. So we'll start out with how everything went for the Hawks. Now, I was initially going to obviate from it, but I did not necessarily get all the notes that I would have down for it. What I will say is that over the course of this week, and quite frankly, a little bit before then, they would extend what is now a 6-game losing streak by losing all 4 of their games in this stretch of time between, make that 5 then, since January 22nd. All 5 of these matchups, including an earlier game just a couple days prior to this period against the Knicks, that would make 6 consecutive losses. They lost an ugly one to the Pistons before dropping both of their ball games at home against the Raptors of all basketball teams. And then you get yourself in a situation where you just deal with a tough one against the Timberwolves. Everybody else seemed to be clamped up. And yes, Trae Young does hurt your case here. You're trying to roll out a team against the Timberwolves and think that you can beat them with Keaton Wallace and Zachary Rizache. You're not going to find a lot of success in that. What I will note is that DeAndre Hunter did at least put up a career-high 35 points off of the bench on 12 of 21 shooting. Again, I didn't know how he was going to fare as a 6th man this season, but it's been a good experiment. You would just like everything else to be coming together at this point, and it just hasn't. I mean, defensively, they did relatively fine. They held them to the same efficiency and still couldn't make anything of it. And yesterday night, they lost their matchup against the Rockets in this one, who won by 4 with a score of 100-96. But, in a case where neither team shot well from the three-point line, you figured it was going to come down to controlling the paint, and they couldn't even do that right. They allowed 12 more points in the paint, despite forcing them into more turnovers. They also lost the battle in transition. They couldn't seem to stop them at any particular point of time when the ball was being pushed up the court. Fundamental things that they couldn't get right. Time and again over this stretch. You would hope that they can break it, but I just don't know. In this particular game, you would have Trae Young return and put up 21 points and 9 assists on 7 of 16 shooting, but he did also have 8 turnovers by himself. Nobody else shot that well, at least out of the players that you would want. I mean, Hunter, after his magnificent game against the Timberwolves, cooled down tremendously. Vic Krejci shot 5 of 14 from the field, and Dyson Daniels even shot 4 of 12 from the field. Quite literally. And on the Rockets side, you would have Jalen Green put up 25 points, 7 rebounds. Also added 7 turnovers. Alperen Sengun had 18 points and 10 rebounds on 7 of 12 shooting. Jason Tate shot perfect from the field. Again, they just did the little things right and came out with the victory here. Now, moving on to this last week or so, for the Celtics, and they would at the very least split their ball games, but in weird ways. I mean, you on January 22nd have to outlast the Clippers in overtime. Despite having every statistical advantage in the respective categories that would determine victory in a ball game. You allow a player like Derrick Jones Jr., I love Derrick Jones Jr., but to allow him to get 29 points, 7 rebounds, and shoot 60% from the field and 57% from the three-point line, while also allowing Kevin Porter Jr. in one of his Spurs starts this season to put up 26 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, and shoot 57% from the field as well, push you to the brink of losing. It was Derrick Jones Jr. who actually tied up the ball game in regulation by getting a layup. So that's a little alarming. And naturally, the very next day, you go just over to Los Angeles from Inglewood to get boat raced against the Lakers game that I already covered. You do redeem yourself in Dallas in the game that I already covered, but then you would on Monday lose a close battle to the Rockets. Now, it didn't have to be close, per se. The Celtics had a large lead in this ball game in the fourth quarter alone, and you still managed to lose control of it. You allowed the likes of a 12-point lead to just dissipate completely. You allowed 21 points off of turnovers and also could not stop the Rockets from shooting the three ball, especially with the likes of Jalen Green struggling. You would think that you would account for other players. Instead, you allow Dillon Brooks to tie the franchise record for most three-pointers made in a game with 10. They clamped up Jalen Green. That should have been the end of it right there. But, jeez, man. Moving on to the last week or so for the Nets. They went 0-3, got blown out in every single one, losing 108-84 against the Suns on January the 22nd. Then getting beaten relatively badly by Miami with a score of 106-97 before on Monday dropping a game that was close for a while, but there was just way too much star power on the Kings. Lost that one 110-96, and that's the fundamental problem here. Again, you know that you're in a rebuild, so you know what you're getting yourself into, and you just have to, you at this point, you have to accept it. I mean, there's no way that a roster like this would beat a Kings team that, in comparison, is stacked. You were not going to do it. And it's always the same trouble with them every time. Like, literally, they don't shoot efficiently from the field as a squad. They get out-rebounded. They did a fine job of converting off of turnovers, but your personnel does not match up in any context with the opponent, especially from a physical lens. And you allow 62 points in the paint. Naturally, you're going to lose. Moving on to the last week for the Charlotte Hornets, they go 1-3 over this course of time. They did drop their first 2 ball games of this slate against the Grizzlies with a score of 132-120, and then the Trailblazers losing by 5 with a score of 102-97. Though in this one, it did not appear as though they were playing LaMelo ball. So, of course, that's going to hurt you. I mean, you're even giving Vasilije Micic, a player that, by and large, has been phased out of the rotation this season. For the Hornets at multiple points of time, managed to get back in the starting lineup for this one. Now, they would get LaMelo back for this game against the Pelicans on the 25th and would win 123-92, with LaMelo Ball having a very solid performance, if I do say so myself. 25 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds to spur his team to victory. And holding the Pelicans to bad shooting splits all around, controlling the paint, and also keeping turnovers about equal with them. Not necessarily letting anything get out of hand for them, though they were able to win in transition. But this game against the Lakers said even more about where they truly find themselves. Now, granted, there's still a lot that they need to do, but when you mean to tell me that in this game between the Lakers and Hornets on Monday, you lose LaMelo Ball after just 9 minutes of total play, and still with guys like Miles Bridges putting up 26 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists on 10 of 23 shooting, while also getting a good contribution from Josh Okogie with 19 points, and even getting Josh Green to get 15 points of his own, you would manage to make this a 5-point ball game after being down by a huge lead after this, and just lose this game with a final score of 112 to 107. That says a lot about where you're at as a basketball team. But it also speaks volumes when you allow the opposing forward center to put up 42 points and 23 rebounds in a ball game, which is exactly what Anthony Davis would do, all on 17 of 28 shooting. So that was definitely a rough one for them. The Bulls next, and over the course of this stretch, they would go 1-2. Now, in this game on the 23rd, last Thursday, against the Warriors in Golden State, they actually had control of that one. But in that one, it seemed like they figured out the meta to try and combat those moments where it felt like teams were trying to trap Stephen Curry, and all of the players on that squad just lit it up to where the Bulls eventually got beaten with a final score of 131 to 106. Then they lose their match on last Saturday, I should say, against the 76ers, 109 to 97. On Monday, they would get a shocking win, their only win of this stretch, against the Nuggets, despite Jokic having yet another 30-point triple-double in this one. And despite Christian Braun even putting up a career-high 28 points, it didn't fucking matter. Because the Bulls had the collective teamwork. Though I won't act like every single person who crossed this threshold shot well from the field, but it means something when 7 different players on your squad can reach double-digit points in a game, while your team can also get 35 assists total on 49 shots. That's efficiency. You know, it probably got a little inflated over the course of time, because naturally you're going to have players commit to ISO ball in isolated possessions. But hey, I mean, you know, it is what it is. So I guess that's a solid win for the Bulls to cap off this particular stretch of time. Moving on to Cleveland. They dropped 3 of their 4 ball games over this time, including 3 straight. They lost to the Rockets both times they faced off. Their first matchup being mired in just drama. I mean, Darius Garland, one of the top free throw shooters by efficiency in the league to that particular point, missed 2 straight at the end of the ball game to lose it there. Then you get a crucial turnover at the end of this matchup last Friday between the 76ers and Cavs that saw the 76ers edge this one out. After the Cavs did their best. I mean, Ty Jerome went off for a career game of 33 points, I believe. But he also committed the crucial turnover at the end that cost them a chance to tie things up. It also did help that Donovan Mitchell had 37 points and Darius Garland had 26 points. The case was there. But, they would only win their matchup, even with their loss against Houston on last Saturday, seeing Darius Garland put up 39 points and 9 assists, they would only win against the lowly Pistons to break their longest losing streak of the season with a score of 110-91. They got to the free throw line a ton in this. That and just making timely decisions also had a large effect on this ball game, with Darius Garland having 22 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds. Donovan Mitchell having 21 points, 6 assists as well, and also having Jared Allen and Evan Mobley both put up 10-point, 10-rebound double-doubles to just clog up the paint in any way they can to both defend and even generate offense if they need to. Moving on to the Dallas Mavericks this past week, I covered their matchup against the Timberwolves last Wednesday. They would respond the very next day with a compelling win against the Thunder of all teams. They allow Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams to go absolutely crazy, but P.J. Washington Jr. himself managed to go for 22 points and 19 rebounds, with Kyrie Irving also adding 24 and Spencer Dinwiddie leading the way with 28 points on 11 of 14 shooting. You think that they would build upon that, but they would lose to the Celtics, as I mentioned earlier in the video. They would then on Monday take out all their anger on the lowly Washington Wizards squad. And you had Klay Thompson go off for 7 threes in the first quarter, and he didn't really have to do anything else for the rest of the game. He would still lead the team in scoring. They would allow Olivier Maxence Prosper to put up 20 points. They would allow P.J. Washington Jr. to get 19, and even Jaden Hardy put up 12 for the fuck of it. Kyrie Irving only played 28 minutes, only had to put up 13 points, 5 assists, and 5 rebounds while taking just 9 shots. Uncharacteristic game for him, but you didn't need a whole lot of effort against a team like this. So they would split their week with a record of 2-2. Moving on to the week for the Detroit Pistons. Yes, the Detroit Pistons. They would go 1-2. They won their first matchup of this particular week against the Hawks, aforementioned. They would then drop their next two, including their matchup last Saturday against the Magic, which saw them lose 121-113. They allowed the Magic to do just a little better spacing the floor. They allowed them to get to the foul line a lot. They did have control of the paint, which makes sense given the Magic's issue right now. But still, does that really mean anything when you have their stars in Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner going off for 32 points each, and not even being able to match that on your end? Though Cade Cunningham, ineffectively, 13 of 31 shooting, got 35 points and 11 assists of his own. It was close, but no cigar. And then, as I mentioned, the Cavs did beat them on Monday by 19. Moving on to the Warriors last week, and I did cover. Oh my gosh, it's just I literally I don't know, man. This is just crazy to see, man. It's wild. It's wild. They split their week as well. But the losses have been terrible. The losses have been absolutely unbearable to an extent. And I covered both of them. I covered the fact that they did win last Thursday against the Bulls. Their game yesterday saw them somehow allow the Jazz to keep it competitive with Colin Sexton going absolutely ham. But the Warriors, without Stephen Curry, Draymond Green, and Jonathan Kuminga in this one, did manage to win by a final score of 114 to 103, with Brandon Pajemski getting 20 points, Andrew Wiggins getting 19, Moses Moody getting 15, Quentin Post getting 10, and Dennis Schroeder getting 23. I think, though, that can just be attributed to how bad the Jazz have been this season, rather than how good the Warriors can be as constructed. I still believe the struggle is the fact that there just is not enough personnel in that, not a real imposing presence in that front court. No disrespect to guys like Kevon Looney or Trace Jackson Davis, but it doesn't seem like teams really fear going in the paint. They're going to test both of them at will, and it seems like more often than not, especially in these losses, they will win out. Also, they have yet again repeated a couple of things from last season. They do start late in ball games fouling just at random. They will literally try to play defense and foul at the same time. And you know what happened to you last season, but it seems like they haven't truly learned that. Also, clutch time games, not on their side still after an entire season spent with them leading the league in clutch time games and having a 500 record. They are doing very much the same thing this season in terms of leading the league in clutch time games, and more often than not, just being split down the middle after every single one. Like, what? That's crazy to think about. It really is. I don't know. But it's just crazy to see. That's all. Before I do move on to the Rockets, I did have to note that the Nuggets, they did go on this rough stretch of theirs. They had no business losing that game. But they did win their first of their 3 matchups this week, going 1-2. And, this first one stands out a lot. Why do I say that? In this one, you had Nikola Jokic, while having just a single turnover in this one, go off for 132 points. Well, in this one, you had Nikola Jokic go off for 35 points, 17 assists, and 22 rebounds. He became the very first player to put up that stat line of 35, 20, and 15 or more since, Chamberlain's 35 points, 24 rebounds, and 15 assists on February 14th of 1968. Now, I know that people view, Chamberlain as just a full-on dominant player in the physical sense and in the scoring aspect. I understand that people also view Nikola Jokic as one of the better passers in NBA history already, and he's not even 30. But what I will offer is, seeing something like that go down should very much change your perspective on what both of those players were capable of. I really think it does. You're not necessarily anticipating Nikola Jokic to go out and get buckets like that. And you never really anticipated, Chamberlain to ever have a game, especially in his scoring prime, have a game like that. But of course, this is 1968, and I guess not a lot of people seem to give attention to his prime when it came to playmaking. And he was certainly more capable than people think in that regard. So that's just a little tangent there. As for the Rockets' week, they have found something in Amem Thompson. They have found something in him. They have won all 4 of their games, 4-game winning streak over this course of time. As I mentioned, they beat the Cavs in both of their matchups in this one. And they also got the win against Boston. What I did not mention in that particular game is that Amem Thompson went off for 33 points, 10 rebounds, and hit the game-winning floater on A.J. Brown, while also putting up solid performance after solid performance in every other one of these. I also did mention that the Hawks lost to them by 4. But like I said, you are getting that production from a player like him. Wait till they get completely healthy. And I honestly do question what this means for, who is Jabari Smith Jr. at this point, right? Just a thought. Would you really, I don't know, he might be small as a power forward, but he's clearly been playing well. I don't necessarily think it would be the wisest thing to put a player who's on a hot streak like that, when Jabari Smith Jr. comes back, in a lesser role. I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice. Now, I'm not necessarily sure of how Amem Thompson would conduct himself in that situation. He could be content with that. But I'm just saying, you have something ascending there. You would like to see that process through rather than try to hinder it. So, it's just worth a shot, I think. I already covered the Pacers. Let's get into the Clippers. As I mentioned, they started off their week on January 22nd, losing in overtime despite a valiant effort from their starting players. They then win 2 straight ball games, one against the meddling Wizards squad, of course, with a score of 110-93. But they also had a hell of a game against the Bucks, even with them getting Giannis Antetokounmpo into a 35-point double-double territory, and Damian Lillard also having a triple-double in this one. It wasn't enough because you had James Harden go off for 40 points and 9 assists on 12 of 24 shooting. You also had Norman Powell get 33 points, 6 assists on 11 of 23 shooting. Kawhi Leonard also had a smooth 18 points. And it seems like, when they've been trying to acclimate him in a pretty effective manner, and it seems like it's working like a charm. They would get back to playing on the Monday and would lose by 2 against the Suns. Zubac had a 16 rebound outing. They had to rally back a little bit. They nearly came back, but it wasn't enough. It did not help that James Harden had a rough night shooting with 24 points on 7 of 17 shooting. And also their defense just allowed Booker and Durant to get cooking. So what are you going to do? Moving on to the Lakers week. As I mentioned, they started off relatively hot. I mean, you went 3-1 in this stretch. You got 3 straight wins against the Celtics, as I mentioned before. Warriors, as I mentioned before, and also the Hornets, as I mentioned before just getting clamped up against the 76ers. That's damn tough. Nothing necessarily new in terms of their developments outside of the likes of Anthony Davis and LeBron clamoring for a big man to accompany Anthony Davis and allow him to move back to the forward position. Like I said, Walker Kessler, for instance, center for the Jazz, has been a name that's been thrown out for multiple teams. Everybody's saying the Lakers should get him. I'm like, fuck that. The Warriors need that. And granted, with Stephen Curry sitting on the sidelines with an injury, perfect opportunity to scope him out, see what he's built of. So yeah, I would. Actually, no. Walker Kessler didn't even. Walker Kessler was hurt in that game, so he was probably there on the sidelines too. There's a chance that they connected. You never know. Moving on to the week for the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies have been rolling most of this season. I mean, to go all the way back even before this point, they would get to a point where they themselves rode a 6-game losing streak after losing against the Rockets on January 13th. They won against the Hornets, like I mentioned. They blew the brakes off the Pelicans, like I mentioned, and they just wiped the floor with the Jazz on Saturday. They had no chance. Jaren Jackson Jr. led the way completely. Ja Morant only finished with 11 points, but he really didn't have to do much of anything. I mean, Zach Edey, Desmond Bane, everybody just finding a way to contribute in any context imaginable. They would then proceed on Monday to get beaten by 37 points against the Knicks and lose 143-106. Ja Morant this time put up 10 points, and that would be a cause for concern. They did not shoot well from the three-point line at all. They also could not stop the Knicks in any context. I mean, they were able to get all the extra looks. They were able to bang home 8 more threes, and they were able to keep turnovers to a minimum in the Knicks case, whereas the Grizzlies could not stop them in transition to save their lives. 31 points in the fast break allowed by the Grizzlies and 36 points off of 26 turnovers compared to the Knicks' 10. Got completely out of hand, as expected. So it's a tough loss for them. They still sit at third in the Western Conference with a record of 31-16. They play against the Rockets tomorrow. That could be interesting. I mean, it better be. You lost against them before starting up your winning streak. Can you now learn from that after a loss and try to show some fight in a potential win against this squad? Because honestly, if things go a certain way, there's no telling if those teams could face off in the playoffs or not. But you've got to try to adjust to that mindset now. Now would be the time for that. The Heat have been through hell this week. They've been through the absolute ringer in this one. There's no other way to say it. I mean, you had them just hearing all the talk about Jimmy Butler this, Jimmy Butler that, and it was clearly getting to Eric Spoelstra of all things. He had to kind of stave off the media with different quotes from a couple of interviews or so. Clearly was getting to him. The team would have to stay mum about it as far as the players go. And all they could do was just go out and handle business. That being said, over the course of time, Jimmy Butler would actually be suspended for the first 2 games between the Bucks and the Nets. With, him missing multiple flights and things. That was a violation of team conduct, and so they just said, hey, you got to sit out for a couple of games or so. He would have been slated to come back against the Magic on Monday, if not for more craziness. You had Eric Spoelstra take it upon himself to announce in front of the team that Jimmy Butler would be benched. Currently, a player like Jimmy Butler is not going to be so enthusiastic to be placed on the bench. So you can imagine what the aftermath would be. And it's still crazy. He would storm out of there. And after that incident, the Heat said, enough of this shit. We're not going to have it anymore. So we're going to suspend Jimmy Butler for the rest of this point up until February 6th, which is the trade deadline. Regardless of what different people would like to believe about this situation, the bottom line is this. Both sides are affected. Both sides have implications in this specific suspension. Why do I say that? When you look at it from Jimmy Butler's perspective, this is definitely his last straw with the team. There's no way. If he wanted the money, he certainly didn't get the money in the offseason leading up to this. Didn't help that Pat Riley was basically trying to shut him down with all the stuff that he was talking over the course of the playoffs. And on top of that, you're just going to go ahead and put him in unfavorable situations or whatever Jimmy Butler might deem as unfavorable, and then just basically put him in timeout or punishment time and time and time again. He's literally said it. I guess that closure and peace of mind wouldn't exist without the money. It didn't help that every single move that he was making seemed to be calculated in a sense on the part of the Heat. So naturally, with that, he's just going to do his own thing because he's not going to want to have somebody go on and try to control how the rest of this thing goes for him. On the side of the Heat, though, and it does kind of tie in with Jimmy Butler a little bit, his trade value has absolutely gone down. And now, depending on how the offers are looking, you might be in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Like, even if you do keep him somehow, there's just going to be such a disconnect between him and the front office and also him and the players on the team who are going out there performing to the best of their abilities. And again, time and time and time again, day in and day out, anytime an interviewer comes up to them, they are asked about the Jimmy Butler situation. That's not fair to them. And though they won't necessarily say anything about the situation, you can bank it home that certain players you're feeling. It's like, I guess some people may regard him as the franchise player for them, at least over the past few seasons. That's not a great way to lead an organization as a player. And also with the performances that Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and even Kelly Ware being able to ascend during this time, maybe a changing of the guard is imminent. And Jimmy Butler would absolutely not want that. If he can storm off the court with you benching him, imagine what'll happen when you make it clear that somebody else is going to be leading the way over him. Oh, that's just going to make a problem even worse. So you can't bring him back. And trading him. if his trade value has actually decreased to this point, what can you truly get back for him? 35-year-old on an expiring contract that is seeking as much money as he is, it's already a risque situation for a front office to put themselves in. And now he's adding in the fact that he's as disgruntled as he has been, and has been genuinely hurt at points too. That could naturally increase as a risk with the current age. So just a lot of unanswered questions here. And it's going to be a very interesting situation. I'm not sure how it will develop, but the best course of action would probably be to trade him. It's just, I don't know what you could possibly get back for him now. There's no shot you will still get the same packages that you once got from some of these teams. All because you, like, the full weight of your franchise is in your hands with this. Like Jimmy Butler, again, it does affect him, but at the very least, once he gets off of this team, he's off of this team. There's nothing he really has to worry about when it comes to that. He may still rock with a few dudes on the squad, but that's really about it. As for you, you're trying to build something sustainable. It seems like Tyler Herro's the next in place. You want to construct the roster around him, so you want to be able to have the assets you do to do it, man. And chances are you're probably not getting as much back as you would expect. That could be a tremendous setback in so many facets. So they need to figure this out and fast. From the front office side, as far as the Heat's week to January 29th is gone, though, they, outside of the game against the Bucks, they did win their last two ball games during this stretch. They did. They quite literally managed on Monday to get a double overtime win, I believe, versus the Magic. Quite the compelling matchup, if you ask me. I mean, in a game where both of them just went back and forth, you had Tyler Herro with 30 points, 8 rebounds, and 12 assists lead this charge for them. Not necessarily the best of shooting nights, but he eventually came through by the end of it. You had Bam Adebayo put up 26 points, 10 rebounds, and 9 assists of his own, and you also had Kelly Ware in a starting role put up 19 points and 10 rebounds on 7 of 8 shooting and 4 of 4 shooting from beyond the arc. So it's safe to say that maybe they've kind of accepted reality. And as hard as it is, they are fighting. You can't not say that. They're still a mediocre team in terms of record, but they are currently 6th in the Eastern Conference. Moving on to the week for the Bucks, I already mentioned their win against the Heat last Thursday. I already mentioned their loss against the Clippers on Saturday. And I already mentioned their loss to the Trailblazers on Tuesday. But sprinkled in there, they did manage to get another win to even out their week with a 2-2 record. They had Giannis Antetokounmpo going off in this game with 35 points and 18 boards and 7 assists with 2 steals on 16 of 23 shooting. Damian Lillard also pitched in 35 points of his own with 8 assists and 5 rebounds on 14 of 22 shooting. Chris Middleton had a solid game off the bench with 22 points in 27 minutes on 10 of 13 shooting. And they definitely contain the Jazz overall. Can assume that they likely put in their bench unit after a while. With the Bucks shooting that streakily, in terms of 60.5% from the field on 14 less shots, they managed to completely get them out of there. It also helped that they were elite in transition. So that certainly helped matters. Okay. Moving on to the week for the Timberwolves, where they managed to beat the Mavericks on last Wednesday, as I mentioned. They beat the brakes off the Nuggets, as I mentioned. They won against the Hawks down the stretch, as I mentioned. That means that on this streak, they went 3-0. They are currently 7th in the Western Conference as of the recording of this video. So it was a good stretch for them, especially after the way that they went out prior to this particular point of time. Moving on to the Pelicans, and the Pelicans just continue to struggle. I mean, they have recently gotten Zion Williamson back, and to his credit, he has been performing, but this has been a lost season. It didn't help that he was out for all of that fucking time due to a litany of fucking reasons. And they, even with him being back in the lineup, they have not caught enough of a fire yet. So, I mean, they really are just playing for pride at this point. What I will say is that, to an extent, they have been getting close in some of these. I mean, they did lose their first two matchups against the Grizzlies and Hornets, as I mentioned. I mentioned that the Bucks game was postponed for another date, which they'll actually begin rescheduling that at some point today. So we'll have to figure that out. At the very least, in this last game of this period between the Raptors and Pelicans, Zion performed, at least. Zion Williamson had 31 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 assists on 13 of 18 shooting. Just straight up paint points and free throws. They, in a 9-point ball game, you would like other people to step up, and that absolutely did not happen. I mean, most glaringly, you have Ease Misi in 22 minutes of play going scoreless. You have CJ McCollum missing 12 shots. You have DeJounte Murray missing 12 shots. And you have Trey Murphy III going 6 of 14 shooting from the field. It's just quite the situation. That's not to say that the Raptors really did well in this regard either. I mean, their leading scorer in Scotty Barnes only shot 6 of 21 from the field. But you had some advantages in reasonable places. At the end of the day, it looks like you just could not buy yourselves enough extra possessions. And that ended up mattering a ton. 7 more offensive rebounds accounted for some portion of this 9-point margin. You can bank that. So it's just consistent sloppy play from this team. There's almost no way for them to really turn it around. At the very least, what you would hope for is that Zion keeps performing and you can at least close out the season much stronger than you are right now. That's what I would say about this. Moving on to the week for the Knicks. And let's just say that their last couple games over this stretch, the game against the Kings on the 25th and the Grizzlies match that I mentioned earlier in the video, saw them put up 143 points in each of them while blowing them out. And I went into a little bit of detail about the game against the Grizzlies. I will note this Kings one, though. I mean, everybody put in a good amount of work here. You had Josh Hart get 20 points, 11 assists, and 18 rebounds in the ball game, with OG Anunoby leading the way with 33 assists. Mikal Bridges had 27 points and 7 assists. Jalen Brunson had 25 points and 11 assists. Karl Anthony Towns just had a cool 18.15 rebound double-double. They didn't even have to do much of anything. Everything was just clicking for the most part. Even with all of what I just said, it's shocking that they were just a smidge below 50% shooting from the field. But at the end of the day, that offensive firepower and that efficiency was just too much for the Kings to handle here. Kept turnovers to a minimum and also just dominated in the paint. So yeah, that was pretty easy for them at this time. Just a dominant 2-game stretch for them. We'll have to see if they would keep that going, though. Moving on to the last week for the Thunder. And main takeaway from this is that, obviously, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is just him. I mean, over the course of this stretch, they went 2-1. They did lose to the Mavericks, as I mentioned earlier in the video, but they also won games against the Jazz and Trailblazers, both Northwest Division teams. And in the game against the Jazz, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was actually able to tally 54 points, his career high, already the leading scorer in the NBA. So that just adds to that catalog of dynamic games from him this season. Still, they sit atop the Western Conference. Moving on to the last week for the Magic. As I did mention earlier in the video, they capped it off with a loss to the Miami Heat. And they went 1-2 over the stretch. They did manage to beat the Pistons somehow. With Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner back, they at least get some well-needed offense they honestly had not had for a while. And still, they just, in each and every one of these losses, it's because they just cannot space the floor. They simply cannot. No matter what the context is. Like, any team can outshoot them. And when you combine that with the fact that they will get lax on defense more often than not, despite them being one of the top units, it's just not a recipe for success. Moving on to the last week for the Philadelphia 76ers, they managed to go on a 4-game winning streak despite still being without, 3-game winning streak despite Joel Embiid being out for each and every single one of these games. And I mentioned all of them. They got a 3-point win against the Cavs for beating the Bulls and then just blowing the Lakers out of the water completely. One of the key headlines, though, does come off of a segment that covered this topic the day after their loss against the Nuggets. And let's just put it like this. It's been a little over 5 years since Joel Embiid has actually played a game in Denver. That could be for a multitude of reasons, but the fact that one player conveniently goes 5 straight years without appearing in a regular season game against the likes of Nikola Jokic in his home court, people are definitely going to run with that narrative. Like, you have got to be kidding. Like, what is he really afraid of? I'm not sure. That's fishy. That's fishy, man. I got to be honest about that. Moving on to the last week for the Suns, they went on a 3-game winning streak over this course of time. I mentioned that they just blew the brakes off the Nets. They managed to beat the Wizards with a score of 119-109, and they did beat the Clippers by 2 on Monday. But one of the more pressing developments that they had last week came via a trade with the Utah Jazz. Now, they acquired the 2025, 2027, and 2029 first round draft picks from Utah, and they sent away their 2031 first round pick. Different people have been stating that another move could be paired up with that, and that with the way the money would have to work in potential trades they're seeking out, could be multiple teams involved in a trade this free agency period. So, we'll have to be on the lookout for that if this is truly the start of something. I mean, Suns infamously didn't even really have a lot of draft capital like that. So to try to stack that up, maybe you're trying to get another co-star in succession with that. Even with them having the capital to make something work now, I still don't really know exactly how much they think that Bradley Beal is worth at this point. I mean, he has gotten demoted to the sixth man on the squad despite being paid a 5-year, $251 million contract. So, do you think the next team he potentially goes to, because again, like multiple sources have stated, he would have to waive his no trade clause in order to be moved. I don't even know why they gave him a no trade clause in the first place. He's not a player that should really have that right reserved, but that kind of capital could be the difference between them actually getting something that's truly worth it or getting fleeced by a trade partner. Moving on to the last week for the Portland Trailblazers, they actually went 3-1 on this stretch. They beat the Magic 101-79. They managed to beat the Hornets, as I mentioned. They lost to the Thunder despite having Danny Avdija put up 28 points in this particular matchup. But at the end of the day, they got themselves in deep, deep foul trouble. They could not stay disciplined on that end. They could not protect the ball well enough. And they also allowed the Thunder to have a margin of, an advantage of 30 in points in the paint. Even Timani Kamara, for the hell of it, decided to put up 24 points off the bench and make all 5 of his threes, with Scoot Henderson also getting 25 points off the bench on 7-17 shooting. We gotta have a talk about Robert Williams III, man. I don't know. Like, they made it. They made the effort to go out there and get Robert Williams III a few years back. And in that time span, he did get injured for an entire season's worth. And he had to go through rehabbing another injury. Then he comes back and he's not really... I don't know. Like, yes, his defense is valued, but even that, to an extent, has regressed. And, I mean, when you have the man putting up just a single point in 21 minutes of play, even if he is coming off of the bench, for all that you gave up for this commodity, I don't necessarily see how that's worth it. So they may have to consider moving on from him. I mean, especially with the way they played against the Bucks. Robert Williams III didn't really have an effect in that game at all, and it seems like they turned out just fine without his services. So, it's just something to think about there. Moving on to the Sacramento Kings, and I'll just say that they have had a little bit of an interesting week, to be completely honest. They went 1-3. Well, 2-2 rather. Over the stretch, they started off on a solid note and they ended on a solid note. Though again, the Nets are an easy team to really beat, right? But in that middle, they just completely crumbled. I mean, their lack of defense was on full display. And it cost them both of those games. They were able to outpace the Warriors, and they were able to just run all over the Nets because, of course. But in the meantime, what if I told you that the game that De'Aaron Fox had against the Nets with his 30 points and 7 assists on 11 of 19 shooting with 4 threes was by far his best game of this stretch. In the Warriors game, despite them winning with good contributions from DeRozan and Sabonis, as I mentioned, Fox had just 14 points on 2 of 11 shooting. And 10 of his points came from the free throw line. Then you get into this game against the Nuggets last Thursday, where despite them trying to keep it competitive, De'Aaron Fox only puts up 17 points, this time on 7 of 24 shooting. And then against the Knicks last Saturday, they end up dropping yet another one with De'Aaron Fox putting up only 14 points on 6 of 20 shooting. So that kind of a slide can be attributed to his inefficient play over the last few games. Like, they're still in play-in position in the Western Conference, but it feels like they want him to perform way better, more consistently than what he is at this current state. I mean, he's in a contract year. Like, his rookie extension is coming to a close. So he's definitely seeking out money. And I guess they're at a crossroads. Like, would you choose Sabonis, who clearly already has his extension in, and would you try to make that work with De'Aaron Fox as well? Well, I don't know. I mean, according to multiple sources, the Kings are actively looking into trades surrounding De'Aaron Fox and potential returns. They're already having these talks. Now, it's kind of surprising to me. But, well, let's see how it's handled. I mean, the Spurs have been rumored. A few other teams have been in there, but it's notably been the Spurs who have, been hearing all about everybody being willing to playing alongside Wembanyama. So, hey, you never truly know. Moving on to the Spurs, speaking of Wembanyama, they also had just their 2-game series against the Pacers. Even split, as I mentioned, and a good product overall to expose the NBA on an international scale to a country like France. I mean, more and more active players from France are going to come in, I would believe, over the course of the next few years. And, I mean, not everybody's going to be a Victor Wembanyama, but you're trying to spread out the game and become a global force, global commodity in a sense. So from that perspective, it's respectable. Moving on to the last week for the Raptors. As bad as they have been this season, they did go on a 3-game winning streak over the stretch of time between the 22nd and the 29th. Now, granted, the Hawks are meddling and the Pelicans are not very good. And I reviewed all those games, but if you can try to get some momentum going, just some momentum, up until the All-Star break, you could be in a spot to fight. I mean, let's call it what it is. We know the Eastern Conference is weak. Any team can really have a fair shot if they get hot at the right time. I guess that's the case with any team in any conference, but hey. Moving on to the last week for the Jazz, and they extended. They just, oh man, they got work to do. We know why they are the worst team in the Western Conference. We understand exactly why that is the case. They went over the course of this time on a 4-game losing streak to extend their overall losing streak to 7 since mid-January. I mean, all of these teams that they have lost to just have their number in essence. I mean, you lost to an Oklahoma City Thunder team. Granted, I guess that's fair. When Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is putting up 54, you get blown out by the Grizzlies, as I mentioned beforehand. I mean, you had to have expected that. So you're not going to prevent yourselves from continuously fouling them and letting them get to the free throw line. They had a 12 point attempt difference in their free throws, and they went 25 of 34 from that range, the Grizzlies. Then you shoot just 25.5% from the 3, though granted, as one of the worst teams in terms of 3-point percentage, I guess they're just reigning true to that. It's like, man. Then you go against the Bucks squad and get demolished by 15. And then this last loss over this time came to a Warriors team without Steph Curry, without Draymond Green, without Jonathan Kuminga. They are just already far at the bottom, and it could still get worse than this. But of course, I guess we cap it off with the last week for the Wizards. They went 0-4 over the stretch to continue what was a 15-game losing streak since the very first day of the new year. Okay? They are getting so desperate to get placement on TV time that they are talking about the most arbitrary things surrounding the team and different players on the team, rather than talking about their play. And even if they do have a good play or something, they'll show that, but then you quite literally look at the scoreboard and you see them getting their asses kicked, and it's like, what is it worth at that point to try to cover this team? They're not doing anything. They are by far the worst team in the league. You can argue that the Jazz in some of these games, they're overmatched, and, they have at least, obviously they've won a little more, but, they're in a tougher conference, and they are still trying to bring together pieces that can compete with these respective teams. But it's not for a lack of effort on their end. They are giving it their best shot out there. And again, at the very least, they have hit double-digit wins by this point. The Wizards, even with having a few more losses out there, seem to be on a completely different level of bad. That it's actually insane. Majority of these players don't even know what they're doing. They have no clue how to play basketball capably well. It's just, oh my gosh. So again, 0-3 over this stretch is just disgusting. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.